One thing that CA and I have really enjoyed lately is the Heritage Series that we've been working on developing. And so far we have interviewed Elder E.E. Cleveland, Elder Charles Bradford, and Elder C.D. Brooks. And these are men that God has used tremendously, CA, in proclaiming the gospel. They've been effective across all lines, and their ministry is just so effective. And in fact, down at Oakwood, they have now the Leadership Center that Harold Lee is the director of. Yes. And Harold Lee was one of their students, particularly one of the protege of Elder Cleveland, and he is now the head of that. And these three men, they have the Bradford, Cleveland, Brooks Leadership Center.
It's a wonderful building. I guess it's less than a year old. We were down there, and I'm told we missed a good breakfast because we were waiting to do this interview, and we were waiting patiently in the sanctuary. And meanwhile, in the Institute, they were having what we thought was a meeting.
Yes.
But Elder Bradford let us know that that was a fully catered breakfast, and we missed that one, man.
You know, we don't miss too many breakfasts, but we did miss that one, didn't we?
We did.
And
we did.
And we were sitting there and waiting and waiting.
Patiently, yeah.
It was a very cold day down there, and but we had a chance to visit. It was a good opportunity, and there were some other people there that came in to visit with us. And Oakwood has been such a tremendous place, and their host to us, a perfect host. They've been so nice and so kind. Yeah. And Elder Bradford, when he came in, as you're going to see in this interview, he came in with this wealth of history and information.
Yes. Well, you know, you are a student of history, and certainly part of the history of the Adventist Church, and we both like history, you know, and to talk with these men, these particular three. Now, I did notice, as you showed me, that they have been on a recent cover of the Ministry magazine.
That is correct.
And it's interesting that we became interested in them, and then others did also. But what's good about that is they have such a wealth of history, and they're getting up in years.
Yes.
And it was good to capture some of this before they passed off the scene of action, particularly to Bradford. As we see in the interview, his mother met with, talked with, dialogued with, took care of Ellen White. That's priceless.
It is.
It really is.
And he, who very well remembers the things that his mother shared with him about Ellen White. Yeah. And one of those is she said, "Don't look at me. Look at Jesus. And don't look at me," which shows that she's a human being, and she did not want to be a stumbling block.
And that's important, and I'd like our viewers to listen for that part in the interview, because that's good counsel for us today. Sometimes we tend to pull Ellen White out of context and turn her almost into a demigod. But she said herself, "Don't pattern yourself after me. Keep your eyes on Jesus, and keep your head and eyes in the Word, and not on me."
Absolutely. And that was always the ministry of Ellen White. Yeah. And I have never, ever had any problem with anything I've found in the Spirit of Prophecy. I have had a problem with some of those who thought they had found things in the Spirit of Prophecy that I did not really feel that it said, because they were taking some things out of context and were quoting them. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure where this idea was born to do the Heritage. We were kicking some things around one day. I think we just kind of came up with it together. But I think it is a God-blessed thing. First of all, it's exciting to talk with these men who have so much experience and have so much to tell us about how God has led. And you get to see that when a person is, I'm going to use this word, elevated to a position in the church, it is not accident. No. It is through study and prayer and dedication and surrender to God. And if there's ever three individuals who are surrendered, Brooks, Bradford, Cleveland, were surrendered to God and used by him in a great and mighty way.
And you know, when we really look at how people are chosen for a different task, I believe that God works through committees. Because you look at these three men, each time they were chosen for different things. They didn't just nominate themselves for these particular offices. For instance, Elder Cleveland was at the General Conference as the one of the ministerial leaders of this church. and a vice president, offered a vice presidency of this denomination. Now, this comes as a result of committees. And committees, I believe God works through them. And he chooses individuals, and he definitely chose these men.
Yeah, sometimes you wonder when you hear some of the actions, but you know, in the long run, it tends to work out. One of the things we're going to hear real quick before we go to this is and we talked about this a little bit, how Elder Bradford's mother met Ellen White, but before that was a Morning Star girl, knew Edson White, and came to the Lord on that boat that went down to Vicksburg, Mississippi.
So the White family really had an impact.
Yes.
Through Edson, and then later through Sister White. On Elder Bradford's mother.
That's powerful.
And that mother, what a mother she was.
Evidently, powerful lady.
Yeah. Well, we're going to enjoy this interview, and we're going to learn some things. And I believe God has some real inspirational messages for us from what these men have to share. And I know that you've known Elder Bradford for quite a while.
Well, as have you.
Yeah, I've known him quite a while.
Yeah.
I don't even want to put the number of years on it, but it'd be over 40 years that I've known him. And I've loved him from the first minute that I ever met him, because I really believe that he's a man's man, number one.
Oh, yes.
And a man of God, a man who looks at things through the eyes of a homiletic vision of things, as a preacher looks at them,
much so,
and studies them and puts them together with this type of a homiletic bias. And I tell you, God has gifted him as a speaker, as a student, as a leader in this church. And I praise God that I've had the opportunity to know him.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, this will be great.
Well, listen, let's go to the interview. This interview took place Oakwood College, and it was a beautiful day and a time to talk with Elder Bradford.
My mother's day, it was about in early 1880 she was born. And in 1894, I think it was, the Morning Star boat came down the Mississippi River. Now, Ellen White was badgering the brethren. She was a wonderful badgerer. She didn't give the brethren any rest. She says, you ought to be going to the South. This was the Reconstruction days. Now, several churches had gone south, mostly from New England. They went down to Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, so forth, and founded schools trying to help the people. And mother was in that era, little girl, 12, the boat comes down, Sister White's badgering pays off. Her own son says, I'm going.
Yeah.
So an adventurous lad he was. He didn't buy a boat, he built a boat. He and his friend Will Palmer in Michigan outfitted it, and a missionary, medical missionary, evangelistic boat. And they sailed it down to the Mississippi, and they went all the way to Vicksburg. And Vicksburg at that time was still suffering from Grant's awful siege of the city. I'm sure there was a lot of bitterness there. This is the Reconstruction, you know, when they're trying to reconstruct and rebuild the South. But here's Mom, a little girl. She goes down to the docks. Everybody's going that way. I can imagine, you know, the only game in town, the only show in town, this boat comes in for these Yankees on the boat, and they have music, playing their music, and good old Adventist music, you know, draws the people in, and you know good and well when after the music you got to stay for the sermon.
Oh yeah.
And so they had Bible study, you know, and sermon and so forth, and got closer to the people. Ellen White said to her son, when he said, Mother, I want your counsel. Everybody came to Ellen White for counsel. And she said to him, I think your idea is good. She said, a boat can move when the problem, we know what she really meant to say in modern terms, when the heat is on.
Yes.
Because the people of the area, black and white, were suspicious of northern white people. Here they were on the boat with an integrated crew. in Mississippi.
Yes.
And Ellen White said, you'll have to be careful. You can't work the way you do in Michigan. She was a wonderful counselor, I tell you, a wonderful woman. She said, now, son, the boat will draw people that you couldn't draw otherwise. And then, as I was saying before, smilingly, the heat would come because the African-American preachers did not want their people going to church on Saturday. And the planters, I say that is a nice way to put it, they didn't want their people off from work on Saturday.
Yes.
So I'm proud of that heritage, and I'm proud my roots go back to that.
Now tell us about your father. How did he find this
Well,
message?
my father was born here in Alabama, and not too far from this spot. And these were the days of migration. Well, the United States population is a population of immigrants, isn't it?
Yes.
And our people were here in the South because of slavery, most of them. And then, after the Civil War, they began to open up opportunities for work. They had no work here. The land was worn out. It was a terrible, destitute situation. But they began moving where the work is. And my people here in Alabama said, they tell me they've got big stockyards up in Kansas City. We can get a job up there. So they moved from, I'm sure it wasn't on the Pullman train, they moved from Alabama up to Kansas City. And my grandfather, my father's father, was kind of a Presbyterian preacher in those days. His mother was one of the singers of the Fifth Jubilee Singers. Lincoln, the name was. Oh, it's a marvelous story, you know. And they tried to get their people educated and trained. We need to remember those days because people were trying to catch up. They got on a fast track if they could, and they moved all over this country, all the way up to Chicago and to your former city of labor, New York and California, all these places. Some of them even became soldiers and buffalo soldiers and whatever they could do.
Yeah.
But you know, the Lord's eye was upon them. And early in the experience of this church, there were preachers of color who were called by God.
Yes.
And they went out to try to warn the people. They had a message to give.
Now, your father and your mother met here at Oakwood.
They met here at Oakwood College.
And they were students at that time.
They were students here. And we got to keep in mind the picture.
Yes.
We can't, when we say Oakwood University, we can't picture all these buildings at that time. No. They had a few little buildings. Now, the biggest thing here was Old Mansion. I slept in Old Mansion.
Really?
When we were kids, we came here to live a while. Old Mansion was the manor house. Huge with great big staircase, you know, and ballroom and all the rest of these things. And that's where the massa lived. And it is alleged that President Jackson, Stonewall Jackson, came here. He was in Tennessee, came down to visit his friends at this place. And here's where we found markers, you know, for graves and so forth. So what did the Lord say? I'll bring them from the north, the south, east, the west, and all groups of people. Isn't it marvelous how that God is an equal opportunity employer?
Now, after your parents came together and they were married.
Not married because my mother wanted to further her education.
I see. Okay.
She
so it took a little while then.
Battle Creek.
Oh.
And she could not get to Battle Creek. Her cousins went to Battle Creek. But she was accepted to go to Melrose Sanitarium in Massachusetts.
Yes.
Became New England Sand, which you know well,
right.
Your part of the world. And she was one of the first students there. By the way, I must not digress, and don't let me talk unbridled because I'll take up everything here. Because I've lived with it, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's part of me. Mother, this little girl, she now finishes. Papa wants to get married. He's going to the ministry. He wants a wife in the ministry.
Yes.
She says, Robert, that was his name, please allow me to finish my nurse's training, then we'll marry. I know how he feels because I felt the same way when I was a young man.
Right. There is no tomorrow.
Yeah, no tomorrow. Let's get right. The Lord is coming.
Right, that's right. That's right.
Well, she went up to Melrose, budding, I guess you call it budding sanitarium.
Yes.
And they were getting going there. And who came to visit, to take a little R&R? Ellen G. White.
Yes, that's something.
And so the matron said, Sister White is coming, Sister White is coming. And they got everything ready. And then they turned to her and said, Etta, how would you like to be Sister White's chamber girl? Now, that is not a flattering term, but you know, when you're chamber girl to the prophet of God, that raises the status of that labor.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And so for several days, I don't know, weeks or so, when Ellen White was there, and we have the cards from the Ellen G. White estate to tell her time she was there, Mother was the one that helped her and helped her comb her hair and so forth and get ready for bed. She was getting up in age then.
Yes.
And not talkative. Not a whole lot of talking. She was writing, and she was thoughtful. And she said to my mother, I'm trying to reconstruct it carefully. She said, Etta, I am not perfect, and I don't want you to make me your example. We all may make mistakes, but I don't want to make a mistake that cause you to stumble. She gave her that good talk, and she didn't talk much after that. But one day she said to her, Etta, how is the Oakwood School coming along?
Yeah.
I'm interested in that place. And
Yes.
she went on to expand on how she saw Oakwood and so forth, and its development, and how she was solicitous of the welfare of these people. So I count that as a tremendous blessing in my past, although I can't be too much like Paul, who said I'm a Hebrew, of the Hebrews and Pharisee, because it's all of grace, you know.
What a precious and powerful memory. Though she didn't speak much, and sometimes you don't have to speak too much to give a flavor. Did your mother ever tell you what she thought of Ellen White? How she, her general impression of her?
The highest thoughts of Ellen White.
Yes,
That's why we are so pro Ellen White
Uh-huh.
in our family. She talks about the time when she went to Boston on Sabbath for Sister White to speak. And there are those of my mother's early friends, some of them who went to school with her, who said that Etta tries to speak like Sister White. You know, Pop had several churches. You know those days. Even in our day, we've had that experience, several churches. And he would sometimes say, Mother, will you have the prayer meeting? You know, I've got to go to such and such a place. And it is alleged that the members would say, well, Pastor, you could stay away as long as you want, as long as you leave your wife. But they teased her. She spoke, you know.
Yes.
She didn't speak like I do, loud and, you know, raging and all that stuff. And in fact, she never heard me really preach. My dad did, and he told me, you need to tone it down, son.
Yeah.
You know, Adventists were such proper people in those days.
Yeah.
But, you know, they put me out in the briar patch, and I had to learn how to talk to the people.
Right. Well, that's a tremendous story. And when you listen to Ellen White saying, don't make me your example.
Yes.
You know, we need to say that to people.
She said that. She said that often.
And we need to say it. Look, we're human beings, and we put on our pants one leg at a time like everybody else. And so don't make Jesus your example.
That's what she told her.
And when the prophet of the Lord can say, don't make me your example, I don't think any of us ought to be trying to get people.
And I don't want to add too much because people will begin to think I'm trying to show off. But during the same period of time, Kellogg was still with us.
Yes.
So my mom was around early on.
Right.
This was early 1900. And Kellogg came to visit. Now, Dr. Kellogg almost, as it were, owned every medical institution.
That's right.
And there were more workers in the medical side, health ministries, and in the preaching ministry. But Dr. Kellogg came to see how this little sanitarium is coming along. And she did tell me that he wore white, just as you see in the pictures, and gloves, but and was was a sanitation freak almost, as you would say. Please pardon me, dear people.
Right.
But he wanted everything clean and nice. And she said those girls had to get in there and whitewash that building and clean up everything. And they were on their P's and Q's. Dr. Kellogg didn't tell them don't be influenced, you know, but because I am the doctor. And one day he said, you may come into the operating room. So Mom went into the operating room with the other girls. Maybe there were 1 or 2 boys in the class too. And they went in the operating room and Kellogg did his operation, his surgery. Yeah, so that was one of her stories. How could she forget that type of thing, you know?
This is fabulous history that I did not know. So obviously you grew up in a very stable, dare I say, Orthodox Adventist home.
Yeah, very Orthodox.
And well educated.
Yeah, well, we were trying. We were. Someone could have called us as I guess it was Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois, the Black Puritans. Mm-hmm. There were a class of Black Puritans. Mm-hmm. They were almost too strict, you know. Mm-hmm. They wanted their children to survive, and those families would have something like this: if you make a grammatical error, you have to put a nickel. You have to give up a nickel and pay. Oh, you said it wrong. The grammatical construction was wrong. Papa would say you owe a nickel, you know. Wow. So they tried their very best, and those old preachers believed Jesus is coming soon.
Yes.
But they also believed that you ought to be preparing. They believed that thing about being prepared and occupying till I come. Yeah.
That has paid great dividends, though, as you look at the African American in Adventism and the education level, and you look at what has been accomplished. And some of us have talked about some of those things. People like Barry Black, who came in under the same type of regimen. Now he's the chaplain of the Senate, and so many others that we have seen this type of raising actually pay great dividends, and in your own life.
Yeah. Well, you know, those families in those days, you had to worship. You had on Friday evening. Mm-hmm. I have 4 sisters, and all of them could plunk a little bit on the piano. And there are 2 of them still living. I'm the baby in the family. I'm 82. I'll be 83 in a bit. And they are 93 and 95. So they're still moving on and still dominating their little brother. You know how that goes.
Now, your nephew, Calvin Rock, is his mother still alive?
His mother is still living. That's my sister, Eva.
Yes.
She's the oldest living relative we have. She's 95. She bought her a car a couple of years ago, a nice car. Like, I hate to tell you the brand of it.
Yeah.
And, of course, she likes to take the older ladies to church.
Yes, right.
And every Wednesday morning they have their Bible study because they don't like to go out at night, Wednesday night. But, you know, those dear saints encourage me because they follow every suggestion made to Christians for developing character and witness. My sister Eva wouldn't dare go through a toll booth without giving 1 hour of your Bible.
All right.
And they shame me. You know, Pastor?
I understand.
I mean, here I am, an ordained minister and all the rest of that, and I'm rushing on to preach, you know, go somewhere, and forgetting the little people I pass on the way. So I have to try to be a little more conscious of that. I didn't want to say that here, but it just came up, you know. But we do have a great deal to be thankful for in the people who have responded to the third angel's message. I live in a little place called Spring Hill. And I'm going to have to say to you, brethren, now here I am admonishing you. It's a shame. I shouldn't do that. But the people depend upon you. They depend upon you. My sisters, they depend upon you. The dear saints in the Spring Hill Church, I know them, I visit with them, break bread with them. And they say, did you hear this on the 3ABN yesterday? You are aware of it, I'm sure, because you have your feelers out and your surveys and all the rest of that. But I can tell you, not from a survey, but from my own individual experience. They will ask me some 10 times, did you see? I said, well, I didn't get to see that, at the time. But you're doing a great work. I don't know if I should take off on that, but it is true, and it must be said, and I am one to say it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Praise the Lord. Now, Elder, we want to, you moved from Mississippi to Kansas up to New England. The family jotted around just a little bit.
Yeah.
Your own personal call to ministry. I mean, you're surrounded by the accoutrements of Adventism. Your dad's preaching, your mom, faithful Adventist. When did the call come to you? It had to start
right
someplace.
On this campus here. My father, bless his heart, and mother, they were pioneers. By the way, I must tell you, my father went to the camp meeting in Kansas City when he was a little fellow just coming into the church. And he said, we're talking about youth ministry. This has been this man's work, and your work has been a lot with young people. So I must tell you this. The old brethren didn't look too favorably on these young people having their own meeting.
No.
And so they were kind of quizzical, and they put them way down at the campground. They had the fairground. They put them way down on the racetrack. And Papa said, we call my dad Papa, he says, one morning he saw this old brother coming up, walking rather down the road. He said, where are you going? He said, I'm going down with those young people where the Holy Ghost is.
Yeah.
And at one of those meetings like that, now these were very few black people in Kansas.
Yes.
He sat next to a couple, Ma and Paul, let's call them. And Paul turned to Ma when they made the call for missions. So you reckon we can give another cow? It brings tears to your eyes.
Yes.
These poor little people.
Yes.
Some of them almost living in mud huts.
Right.
They travel for a day or two to get to camp meeting. When they get there, the brethren make an appeal. And Paul turns to Ma, you reckon we can give another cow?
Another cow.
And that's how they built this church.
That's right.
They had very few members. But they were like a little boy who said, and the big man asked a little boy, it's always nice preaching to have a big man, a little boy, you see, gets attention. The big man said to the little boy, son, how much you weigh? He says, I weigh 80 pounds. But you ought to see me when I'm in dead earnest. Then I weigh a ton. So this little church weighed a ton, didn't it?
Yes.
They just went out and conquered and attacked the enemy. And they have all these institutions. And I hope 3ABN, and I know you won't, let that die, that spirit die, that seize those people. And of course, we're globalists, aren't we? Come on now.
That's right.
We are globalists. We see, we got vision, man. Now, you and I, my friend, I may not need to talk too much about this on 3ABN, but every now and then we have cast eye at a sports page or heard a story.
We're aware that they do play.
You're aware. We're aware. And,
yes.
and you are from New England, and you're Boston Celtics and all that. And one of them, the basketball player, says he can see the whole floor at the same time.
Yeah.
Everything going on. Adventists have got to see the whole floor.
Yes.
We can't just see our little bailiwick.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yes.
We've got to see, and we sang the song. We used to sing it far and near. To make me preach now.
Yeah.
The fields are teeming.
Yes, that's right.
And we said we got to go out there.
That's right.
We got to go out. We got to go out to Salusi.
Yes. Now you came into the ministry.
Oh, you got it. I got it off already. I told you, hold me on, brother.
No, we're with you. We're with you.
Hold me to
you're
it.
with,
Hold me to it.
But and I'm coming back to exactly
Yes,
what you're
sir.
talking about. You came into the ministry in the 40s.
Yeah, in the 40s, like 45.
45.
Well, in 46, I left school and went into the organized work. I had my internship paper.
Right.
And I started in Arkansas, Louisiana.
Arkansas, Louisiana conference.
Yes, sir.
And they had a superintendent.
Yes, for the colored work.
All right. And then later on, it was 2 years later, they started the regional conference?
The next year.
Next year.
The next year we
So
started.
see, one of the things I used to bring out is that two presidents from North America, 2 out of the 3, were once employees of the Arkansas-Louisiana Conference.
Absolutely.
And this was kind of a little trivia.
Yeah.
And one was Elder Bradford, and the other was Don Schneider, the current president.
That's right.
And both had started in their work there.
Arkansas.
Now, at that time, what was the membership of the World Church?
You know, I wish I could tell you.
I think it was about 300,000.
Yeah, it's about that. You know, I remember
Yes.
as a tiny little tot in New Rochelle, New York, when Papa was pastor there.
Right.
They were saying the world membership is now 144,000. What are
Yes.
you going to do
That's right.
with all the rest of these people?
Right. That's right. And then we got up to around 300,000.
Yes.
Went early 60s, went to 1 million.
Yes.
And then in 1961, you were elected president of the Lake Region Conference.
Yes, 61.
I met you in the fall of 61. You spoke at Andrews University, and that was the first time I actually met you. Came down and got acquainted.
Yes.
And you will not remember that, of course, but I remember that
Well,
that event because you met a lot of people that day.
I'm like Elder Richards.
Yes.
Your predecessor is one of the great media men of this church. Elder Richards was asked by dear saint, Elder Richards, do you remember me? He said, Sister, how could I ever forget you? I'm sorry. I don't want to bring a levity in.
No, but I've used his line many times.
Okay.
And it's amazing how many times that when you do that and you wait, pretty soon it comes back where you didn't actually see those people.
And I always enjoyed, one of my great joys has been to encourage young ministers.
Yes. Ellen, you have.
Young ministers.
Yes.
Coming along.
Right.
And it's almost like I had a friend, Dr. Cherry. He wasn't an obstetrician. They didn't know what it was in those days, even medical people. But when he'd bring the child into the world, I said, Lord, what is this child going to face?
Yes.
You know? And you see the young preacher say, Lord, what is he going to face? Enemy's there, isn't he?
Yeah.
That's
to
right.
oppose him in his ministry.
But when you look at this church that was started with such humble beginnings, and how the people were determined to put this message forward, and you have been a part of seeing that message go from roughly 300,000 worldwide to something like 16, 17, who knows, 18 million members. In fact, if you add our children in, which we don't add our children, but other denominations do, you're talking about 25 million people around the world that now believe this message.
That's right.
And it was from the sacrifice of people like that lady and that farmer.
That's right.
Can we give one more cow? And one more.
Sir.
And people like your mom and your dad who were preaching this message.
Yes. Oh, you did ask me about Dad, didn't you?
Yes.
Mom and Dad, they went out. I don't know when this was. I'm going to really try to reconstruct these things better.
Yes.
But they went to a little area in Arkansas and got a big house and started a boarding school.
Is that right? Wow.
And I met several of those people who were in that school. That was where my mother contracted malaria. And one of her children, whose name was Rob Etta, his name was Robert, her name was Etta, became invalid, and they think that one of the girls in the school dropped her. She never walked. She lived to be 7 years old, I think. But it was at that place where my dad said he went to the union session. And they had a lot of these self-supporting schools and institutions, medical and educational. And Papa says he went to the Union Brethren. He wrote it all up. He had it written up wonderfully. And the end thereof was, Brethren, if you could just donate us one cow.
Wow.
I think he must have gotten that
from that man he heard.
And they had this little institution. And there was a pastor, Robert Riles, and his family, his sisters, who were all in that school. And now as we look at these census reports that a friend of mine is sending us, 1910 or something, they were there in Arkansas, and I saw the Riles family there in the same column with my father and mother.
Elder, I'm curious, because from this vantage point, looking back over your career, for someone who was so obviously suited for ministry and gifted for ministry, was that something you always wanted to do growing up as a pastor's child, or did you have that time when you were thinking of maybe doing something else?
Not really. You know, young people have their own mind. Sure. They've got to grow. And I think one thing I appreciate about my parents, they were tough and they wanted you to go the right way, but they didn't want to think for you and plan for you and make decisions for you. I was interested in other things. My mother had a very great friend whose name was Dr. Grace Dugwit Kimbrough, a woman who graduated from the American Missionary College, Kellogg School in Battle Creek, and had studied abroad and all that, and she was a leading physician in the city of Philadelphia. And my mother and father had known her through the years. She was drawn to Mama because Mama was a nurse. And together they used to teach practical nurses programs to the public in the city of Philadelphia. And we have in our possession now a little manual that they wrote, you know, how to bandage, how to do this, that, way back. And they enjoyed working together. And Dr. Kimbrough, as we used to say, one of the old saying, took a shine to me because I was her friend's son. And she was known to be a little bit, you know, like Kellogg. She was a little, she was a little female Kellogg, you know. Wonderful doctor. She could tell the girl when the child was going to be born. You know, legend. They have urban legends. And I've had women to tell me, Dr. Kimbrough said, about September 10, you'll be ready. But, you know, I don't know how to take that fully, but they believed it, and they weren't telling the story. But she said to me, you should be a doctor. So I was a little conflicted. And my mother and dad never said anything to me about being a doctor or a minister. But finally I decided to come down to Oakwood. She had things planned for me to be at Temple University, then on to the University of Pennsylvania Medical School and so forth, and maybe to come take her place because she was the chief physician at the Mercy Douglas Hospital.
Wow.
You know, named for Fred Douglass. Yeah. Mercy Douglas Hospital in Philadelphia. She was chief of staff. And to have a female chief of staff in those days, you know, was a little different.
That's right.
She was a great Seventh-day Adventist too, but she had a lot of Kellogg thoughts.
Did you ever consider seriously becoming a doctor?
No, I didn't. I thought about it fleetingly. And at that time, I was interested in being with the boys, you know, and a lot of things in mind, having a good time. I enjoyed baseball.
Because you, of course, were a young pastor one time.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember your first church, your first sermon?
Yes,
you remember those early experiences?
My first church was Baton Rouge, Louisiana, right after the Huey Long days. Then also at Hammond and Covington. Took a little stint in Lake Charles. Had no automobile, so I had to get on a train. I was helping Elder W.S. Lee, one of your predecessors at Ephesus Church, when he was a tremendous evangelist in New Orleans. I went to New Orleans to help him, right from Oakwood. And he said, well, man, you got to go to your church in Lake Charles. I said, how am I going to get up there? Well, you get on the bus or the train, whatever you can do. You're a preacher now, you do it. And so I got on a train on Friday night. After I had led the song service in the tent, I got out to the train station, got on the train, went to Lake Charles, got there in the morning, and went by Sister So-and-so's house, whoever, you know how we would do in those days, change my tie, and clean up myself, and get ready for church. And we'd have the service, Sabbath school, and the 11 o'clock, and then MV, we called it, in the afternoon. Maybe a little board meeting, a business meeting that night. I thought I had to have a meeting, you know, the pastor of the church. And then they take me to the train, put me on the train that night, and I get on back to New Orleans for the meetings on Sunday night.
Now, did you sleep sitting up, or did you have a sleeper?
A sleeper? I never heard of it. I know what you're doing to me now. No, I never heard of a sleeper.
Oh,
and
man.
there I was doing. But you know, it was just a glory and a joy.
Oh, yes.
To be in the ministry.
Yes,
and
right.
making baseball illustrations. And Willie Mays, the young ball player out of Alabama, hadn't been anywhere, and he loved to play, played his heart out, and he got this nice big fat check in the mail. He said, to tell me that you're paying me to play?
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, he said I would pay them to play.
Yeah, paying me to play.
Yeah.
So that was, I don't want to either glorify the ministers of the past. As Ellen White said, we all have our faults and failures. But you know, they were just glad to get into the game.
Yes.
And they never asked how much is the salary.
No.
They didn't even know it.
No.
Yeah.
But they were just happy to be there.
You know, when I was called into the ministry, I would never have dreamed of asking them how much I would make.
No, that was really not
Never.
a polite question,
No.
was it?
In fact, I believe in those days, if you had asked it, the call would never have been finalized.
Yes, the brethren would say.
That's right.
The brethren would say, you know, Brother Gilly is too materialistic.
That's
minded.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
We have to consider.
Yeah.
Well, I came under George Earl, as you
Oh,
well
yeah.
know, and I didn't ask George Earl that question either. Not in my day. We didn't ask that question.
No.
And I came under Merle Mills, and he
Dear
wouldn't
Brother
ask Elder Mills
I knew
that.
Brother Mills, one of the strongest leaders, a spirit of prophecy man.
Yes, he was.
Brother Mills.
Yes, he was.
Indeed. Poor man.
Yeah.
Passed away with the
West Nile virus.
West Nile virus.
He worked all over Africa, slept in mud huts
I've been in his home
without
in Africa.
without even any kind of mosquito netting, and with some people who've told me they've been with him.
I've been with
And then
him.
he's bitten by a mosquito in Loma Linda, and
West Nile.
does not make it.
But he was a great missionary. He
Yes.
was a man that held up for
Oh, yeah.
what he felt to be the standards and the principles.
Oh yes.
And I stayed with him in South Africa.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Now, to moving you along, because you started out in the South, but you didn't stay in the South.
No.
Yeah.
Now, you can say that it was a movement. We were part of a movement. We were a long time in Baton Rouge, 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's where my first child was born. I got married not right after I began. I was a year or so trying to get married. My wife was here. We met here, and she was working at the conference office in Atlanta,
Yes.
the new South Atlantic Conference, one of the first secretaries there. I was over in Baton Rouge struggling. She had pity on me. We got married. And I took her to Baton Rouge, and boy, it was a great day because we had an undertaker there who was friendly to us, and he said, I'll rent you this apartment. You can bring your bride here. A little two-room place, you know. We thought that was great because many of our colleagues roomed with people in their
Yes.
homes to rent a room.
Right.
But we had our own little place, even if it was next door to the mortuary. But we didn't pay that attention.
You had quiet neighbors.
Quiet neighbors. We had quiet neighbors. And the church was right the next door.
Yeah.
And the saints would come by. They said, we just can't go by without knocking on the door to say, how are you, Pastor? And the early morning prayer meeting would come by, and everybody would come by. But there we were in Baton Rouge. And then
Yes.
we went to Dallas after that.
All right.
We had a town called Monroe, Louisiana,
Yes.
northern Louisiana. And I saw all those people, that population there of African-American people in the area up there among the people of the 2 or 3 colleges up there and so forth. I said,
Grambling is in that area.
Grambling. And we had to get up there. I had to do something. So Sam Myers, S.D. Myers, and I, we went on up there, put up a tent. We had nothing in town. No church was there. And there were only 1 or 2 members. And everyone was laughing. What in the world can you do here? But we just got out and preached. We didn't know it was like that bumblebee. We just went on up, flew. And people began coming. Left a little group there, about 30. I think they have 200 or 300 there now.
That's right.
And one dear saint who was baptized in that meeting had her 100th birthday this January, a few weeks ago, and the members wrote me a letter and said, Sister so-and-so is going to be baptized. Of course, do you remember me? You know,
That's right.
I couldn't tell you her from anyone else, and she must have married after that, and her husband is 100 now also. I was happy to send a little note greeting her.
Yes.
And she said, I was never going to go to that church. I have nothing but a tent. She wrote a little note to me, but said they sang, and I came in, and I'm still here.
Yes.
Now, you know, brother, that's a little payment, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it is.
A little remuneration.
That's right.
A little remuneration.
So what church did you pastor in Dallas?
In Dallas, I was at the church on Haskell.
All right.
And then we moved whatever the other church was, can't remember the name, but I know we were right there on a
City Temple?
No, it was before that.
Before City Temple.
And we had a nice church there that W.W. Fordham built.
Yes.
He was the superintendent of the mission. We had a mission.
Right.
And what a joy that was to be there in Dallas. But my friend, Elder Frank Bland, somewhat of a mentor to me from Philadelphia, kept after me, says, you must come up to my conference. And so there I was, this little intern. I was I was ordained then, but between my friend W.W. Fordham and Frank Bland. And Frank Bland sort of won out because he wanted me to be the home missionary secretary of the field. That was the term then.
Yes.
Right.
Which is now?
It's now church ministries.
Yes.
It went through sort of a change. It was home missionary, it was another one.
Lay activities.
All those things, but the same thing.
Yes.
If by any other name, you know, it's the same. And so I got into that. That was a due approach. And I began to try to see what is in this. And I said, I'm still just a young kid in my 20s, maybe I can help the churches. And made friends with the preachers. Well, I was always one of them, see. And so I used to like to go around to the churches and have rallies and so forth, and go out knocking on doors and all that, you know, with the people in the Central States Conference. Then we went to St. Louis. St. Louis was the big town in the conference then.
Yes.
And quite a population and a good thriving church. And I said, well, whatever you brethren say. And so I went there to hold meetings, evangelistic meetings. And after the evangelistic meetings, the senior pastor retired. And the brethren looked at me and said, oh, you stay right here. You be the pastor. You're no longer the home missionary man. And the union brethren didn't like that. You know, I was in with a very fine leader in the union. He looked on us as his boys, you know, all of them from all the conferences. But they took me out of that, and somebody said, well, that's a demotion. It didn't seem to me. I almost said, in the words of the Brer Rabbit, this is where I was born, right here in the cabbage patch. And you know, I had a wonderful experience in St. Louis, Missouri. We had 4 or 5 tent efforts there, and the membership got up to about 500. In those days, that was a big church. And Elder M.V. Campbell was the union president, such a very correct man, fine gentleman. And he used to come and visit his churches, and he had a bulletin he put out, the largest churches in the union, how they're getting along. And mine was like a boop in out, my name was with all the rest there in that list. And I was very keenly aware of city evangelism. And so we planned work and went forward. And in St. Louis, we had a man by the name of Glenn Leggs, who was a natural lay activities person in the church. He was the lay activities leader, home missionary leader. We had every Sabbath, we gave him his time. And every 4th Sabbath or 1st of the month, he had the day when the people would report on their Bible studies. And he would say, Brother Mary, and you would say 5 studies, 10 people. He would say, Brother Gilly, he would say 10 studies, 20 people. And sometimes say, and by the way, Mr. and Mrs. Smith are here today. And the old preacher would make a call, and sometimes they would come forward. And I meet people everywhere, and they tell me, You know, you baptized my grandmother there.
And that's something.
And by the time we got to the 10 effort, man, we had 10, 20 people ready.
Now, you obviously got into departmental work fairly early. Still in your 20s, you got a taste of it, and then sort of back into pastoral work. How many years in total was your pastoral ministry? Because you got into administration fairly quick.
Well, I went to pastoral ministry like 46 to 52. Okay? And then from 57 in New York, left with St. Louis and went to New York. I was home missionary again there and evangelist. They added that on to me. I was there from 57 to 61. But I was in City Tabernacle Church a couple of those years. That's all the time I've ever pastored. Was from 46 to 57 and 60, well, let's say 59 to 61. Then we went to Chicago. But so that's when I was in Buffalo. And Buffalo is one of my favorite places because the members of the church rallied. They had such music in that church, man.
Oh, yes.
And they had such a fine baptism there in Buffalo. And Bermuda, we had wonderful time, Bermuda.
Was there a young fellow running around in the church in Buffalo, or was he around?
That was before. That was way before.
That was a year or two before I came on.
He's here in this setting. He's conscious of his age a little bit, but he looks at me. You see.
Yeah.
So don't make him be his contemporary.
Well, I know you traveled around a little bit, and you sort of made your mark on the church, or left your mark on the church as an administrator. Obviously, your pastoral years were successful, but you got into administration fairly early. And,
61.
And did a very, very fine job.
Well, I was every bit of 35 years old. You know, getting up to be old. Yeah.
So you left Northeastern and ended up in Chicago.
I was there 9 years in Chicago. And that's when I began to have a little insight into other areas of church activity. And my union presidents were always very kind. They took me in. I was on all the boards and committees, you know. I was on the Hinsdale Hospital Board. I've been working with hospital people since 1961.
Yes.
They look on me as the old man among them now. They keep me on the board of Adventist Health System, Sunbelt. And this man used to be there on that board.
I did.
We miss him. But, I have seen the development of the new open staff hospital in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. When I went to Hinsdale, on Hinsdale board, there were 2 or 3 doctors who ran that sanitarium. Now, a lot of us don't understand. It's hard for me to get adjusted to the new ways of things, but you cannot have that kind of hospital today. It doesn't exist.
No.
You see, everything is regulated by the government now and by the hospital groups. And I praise God that in spite of the difficulties and all of the temptations to be like the world, that our hospitals are surviving, and it seems that they are coming back more and more.
They are.
I want to give that good word out. Could I do that, brother?
You can. And I was just down in Florida at Celebration Hospital.
Yes.
And as I went in and saw a physician there and the whole deal, I was thinking how much like the original plan that hospital is. And with the added medical teams that they have and the technology that we have today, yet in so many ways when you walk into that place, you think to yourself, this is sort of like what Ellen White and Kellogg had in mind.
And Celebration and
right.
Creation Health.
Yes, that's right.
Yes,
that's
I've
right.
been a part of it.
Yes.
You know, isn't it wonderful, Lord, let me live long enough to be there. And those gentlemen said, Brad, we want you to be on our board.
Yeah.
I feel sometimes still a little, you know, self-conscious about it, and almost a tiny little guilt feeling. But Ellen White said, now listen, brethren, I have to preach. I'm sorry, I'm a preacher. She said our institution may swing out counsels to writers and editors. They may swing away, But it says they are prisoners of hope, and the Lord will bring them back. So you, brethren, keep sending out that good, positive message. You may be stumbling a little bit, and you know, Sister White, even when they had the problems at Battle Creek, she didn't disown everybody.
No.
She didn't down everybody. She told Kellogg, don't you build another great big institution here. He went on ahead and did it, but she gave him a few dimes in the collection. You know what I mean?
Right.
And still prayed for them.
Yeah.
Yes. That's rich, isn't it?
It is. It's powerful. Yeah.
You know, it's those kind of insights that really help us to get a good look at Ellen White, but also at the impact that she has had on leaders like Charles Bradford.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. You know, it was tough, Jim. I sat with our chief editor, Len Wenzel. There was so much there, and we had to condense to try to get it even into this 2-hour format. What do you take out? What do you leave? So it was really tough trying to decide what we were going to leave, because Brad has so very much to say, and it's all good, and it's all inspirational. But what touched me, Ellen White said, don't follow me. Don't pattern yourself after me. Stay on the Lord. Kellogg told the nurses, I'm your pattern. Follow me. The humility of one who is blessed by God and the other who maybe thinks a little more of themselves than they should.
Yeah, right.
That kind of thing. And yet his mother was exposed to all of that and stayed balanced and brought it down to Elder.
You know, Kellogg was a self-made man, and sometimes self-made men have to be careful that they don't worship their maker,
creator,
who is self. And so we want to make sure that we don't fall in that same trap.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I tell you, I'm looking forward to the second half of this interview, and I know that our viewers are as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So call a friend, tell them to tune in. They can still get in on a good portion of this interview.
Yeah, he had some nice things to say about 3ABN too.
Yes, he did.
We appreciate that.
Very much supportive of this ministry and of God's leading in it. So we'll be right back after this.